too boring to me. All right, so let us call up some games from this position. Here we've got a string of games. I want to get by the highest rated white players. Not particularly high rated. Velimirovic, he's a great player. What we really need here is we need some games played by correspondence players, because a lot of the best Blackmar Diemer players are these sick correspondence players. I'm just going to grab all of these this top page of games. All right. All right, so if I click here, it's not good. What if I go to analysis on this? Still not good. All right. Let me just fix that for a second. All right, here we go. When I'm thinking of correspondence games, a lot of the games I'm thinking of played in the Blackmar Diemer were actually played before computers were so good. I think nowadays correspondence chess might just be a bunch of stupid computers playing each other. It might be like lame and boring, and they might not play openings like the Blackmar Diemer against each other anymore. But in the old days, there were some really awesome, intense correspondence players who played gambits, and it was pretty sweet. So anyway, what we're going to go through here is we're going to go through some moves quickly. Why are engines allowed? I don't even know if they are allowed, but yeah, it does kill all purpose. I don't know. If they're allowed, it might just be because I've heard some correspondence players say it's because they can easily beat engines, which I think is just a complete lie, but who knows. And then the other reason that the engines might be allowed in correspondence chess might just be because they're like, well, we can't police it, we can't stop it, so we might as well just embrace it. But then the whole thing becomes pointless now. The old days were completely sweet. I mean, like Paul Carrez was a correspondence player. There were a lot of great players who played correspondence chess. Anyway, I'm not very well informed about correspondence chess, so I shouldn't even be spouting opinions on air about it. Let's just check out this opening. One thing I wanted to ask you guys was if you have any idea what the major plans for black would be against this Blackmar Diemer. We've already talked yesterday briefly about what the plans are for white, and I said the number one plan was to attack the black king on the king side in general. And in general, to exert pressure on these ENF files. Wait, if this is analysis, why can't I make arrows? That is not satisfactory to me. All right. So all right. All right, so Blackmar Diemer. All right, our goal today is we're going to try and play through like 10 or even 20 Blackmar Diemer games in the next 80 minutes and pick up a bunch of patterns about what the games look like and what happens. Before we get into that, why don't you guys quickly brainstorm with me what are some plans for white and some plans for black in this position. So I've told you about attacking on the king side for white when the black king goes there, and I've also told you in general about having pressure on the E and F files. I also mentioned that there is an option for white to simply play bishop g5, queen d2, castles queenside quickly and try and get opposite side castling and play from there. Okay. What do you think of the different options for black starting from here, given white's pretty clear plan to use these two files for pressure? In that sense, it's partly a positional gambit in the style of the Banco, right? In the Banco, you have one strong pawn giving you space in one area, and then two open files next to your strong pawn, and you try and put pressure on those files by bringing your rooks there, and then seeing what opportunities come up. What plans make sense for black from here? It's not a Smith-Morra on the wrong side of the board. It's just like a Smith-Morra, and it's actually very similar to a Smith-Morra in that sense. Yeah. You're going to try and put pressure on the two files that you have semi-open, like in the Smith-Morra. It's a great comparison. Although in the Smith-Morra, this pawn is here, right? So this is more exactly a Goering Gambit reverse, but nobody plays the Goering Gambit because black can avoid it. All right, so one plan that's been suggested for black is to play bishop g4. And the idea behind bishop g4 would be what? In general, it's much better if we talk in sentences than in moves when we're talking about plans. And then when we're calculating something, then you got to give me strings of moves instead of saying like, well, I try and bring my knight near their king. So, so the bishop g4 suggestion, try to stay solid and exchange pieces is one plan given. Okay, that's a great plan. So bishop g4 might fit into that insofar as it could be involved with trading pieces. It could be with the idea of following up with e6 solidly and not having your bishop trapped. So black might want to play solidly with like e6 and c6 and secure their position, but trade the bishop first. Black doesn't have many great options, and bringing out the bishop develops a piece and creates a pin. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so everybody says bishop g4 makes some good sense. Does anyone have any other suggestions of what might be a good plan for black here other than bishop g4? Because bishop g4 has its pluses and minuses as well, and it's not like the only move. There's a few options here. You could play bishop f5 instead of g4 if you want to prevent white from taking over this diagonal, if you think that's critical to your king getting attacked. So yeah, you could play a defense with bishop to f5. And that is another one of the major defenses. And you could go g6, bishop g7 with a fianchetto. The idea there is you keep open piece play, right? This bishop can always come out because we're not playing e6, but we're waiting to see where we bring it out. The bishop on g7 attacks d4. We can perhaps combine it with knight c6 at some point, and we just get a free open development of all the pieces for black. Even though technically black has a little less space, we play it a little bit Gruenfeld style, and all our pieces can come out and get spaces. c6 and e6 are playable, but what's the point with them, right? What are our plans or points here? All right. And we have a suggestion here of maybe playing knight d7 and c5 as a plan. And someone else is also questioning whether you could play c5 to contest the white pawns. Yeah, a couple of people are wondering about it. e6, bishop e7, castle c5. Going like Karl Kahn style or French style, the quick c5 counter. Yeah. All right. So, yeah, I think we've named most of the major defenses. There's the idea of bishop g4, the idea of bishop g7 with free development. Bishop g4 is to probably trade off that bishop and then play solid with some piece exchanges. There's the idea of e6, bishop e7, and seeing just how fast can you rush c5 to counter white center. And if we look over here, the most common moves in our master database are bishop g4 and g6, equally played. Then slightly less common, bishop f5 and e6, also commonly played. And then moves like c6 and c5 and a6 become quite rare. So mainly bishop g4, g6, bishop f5, and e6. Okay? So now let's see our first game here, okay? Bishop g4, h3. So one thing about bringing a bishop to g4 is that it does tend to give your opponent the option of trying to grab the bishop pair. And here black just takes on f3, but as you guys may know, if you come to h5 and white really wants the bishop pair, they can still do it like this, right? And they've made weaknesses and they've gained space, so it's double-edged, and who knows if that's good or bad for white or if white wants to do it. And I had a game yesterday in this variation, right? Do you guys remember that? It was the one where I eventually put a bishop on f4 against bishop d6, queen c7, and I had a bishop on g2, and then I had the tactic of knight b5, pawn b5, knight g6, hg6, bishop takes d6, queen d6, and then bishop b7 at the end, winning. So this is definitely an option for what white might do, is if you play the bishop g4 line, they might go for trying to grab the bishop pair. Okay, so black gives the bishop pair. Queen d4, queen b7 doesn't look good, so black plays c6. Now bishop f4, and now you could strongly consider whether or not you can grab this pawn, right? I mean, there could be risks, but you might wonder whether or not you can do this. Right? If white tries this tactical solution with knight b5, going for knight c7, cb5, maybe queen b7, queen e4, knight e4, bishop b5, king here. It's pretty crazy, right? We sacked a whole piece. But it's still totally unclear what's going on. And wasn't there mate in 1 with queen c8? Here I was in check. You could also castle queenside trying to set up this mate, but then a6 might stop what we're doing. Instead of queen takes b7, seeing this, we could play bishop check first. Now if knight c6, you can take twice and take on a8. And if king d8, you can play rook d1. So it seems to force knight to d7. And now in this position, you might... Well, on rook d1, there's queen b4, queen b5. So maybe now you play something like queen takes here. And you're threatening checkmate here if they take on f4. And if they go queen e4, now you can take, and play bishop c6. And seems pretty playable for white. So some very, very messy possibilities if black plays queen d4. In addition to which, maybe you play rook d1 first and then go for something similar, right? So that's a whole other question, right? What happens if you do this? Anyway, I don't know offhand whether or not this works or not, but this is a key tactical move to keep in mind, okay, in these c6 variations, because queen b7 is so big. Anyway, black plays e6, not taking this pawn. I feel like there's another variation where white just plays bishop e3. And if these are both variations, that means that probably this queen d4 line is pretty controversial. Like it's probably not like It's probably not 100% decided that it's either good or bad. It's probably playable. So e6, now white castles queenside. So what has white got for the pawn sacrifice so far? They've got the bishop pair and a little bit of space still, right? Just for everybody's reference, the games that we're looking at today, from what I saw, the ratings tend to be 2400 to 2550-ish FIDE. So these are like strong IMs and weaker GMs. They're not the top players in the world, and they're also not weak players. They're like super competent, and it's not just like cheapos and traps that beat like a 1200. This is real chess. So, interestingly, this gets white to retreat, which seems quite bad for white. And black is playing as we kind of outlined with bishop g4, just very solid, bringing out all the pieces. He's going to use d5 for a knight. You may notice that he hasn't castled kingside yet. I think partly he's trying to keep open the possibility of castling queenside, because once he castles kingside, then it's obvious you've got opposite side castles, and white can start marching his pawns or coming up with whatever kingside attack he wants. So the black king, since he's feeling no threat in the center yet, he's delaying his castling and keeping open these options. And that actually seems good to me. I would not call that a mistake by black to not have castled quickly here. Okay, so white's just really trying to like beg black to castle so that he knows where the target is. And black says, no thank you. Okay, this is a sweet move. Now he's threatening queen g7 because on rook g8 he's got these things on the f-file hanging. So this is a nice move, making use of the potential f-file to put pressure on, which is exactly what white should be looking for in general. And you see, rather than castle, black prefers to just defend g7 with this. He's really wanting to castle queenside. And now white plays a tactic. Whoa. All right, hang on. Let's just throw in this variation here. The idea would be what? If bishop g5, isn't there queen d4? Because there's no check. Right? The queen's trapped. She has to come here. Now bishop h7, since there's no bishop check. And I guess this is good enough for white, and just capture here. White will temporarily be up a piece, and I don't see quite enough counterplay for black, although there is some. But he also can't castle because this rook cuts off his king, and white takes the rook, and yeah, it's not going to work out for black. So he throws in bishop takes c3. Now one thing white could do would be save his rook, but he just takes back here. Okay. And why does b take c3 not work here? Not because of queen f6, bishop g5 trapping the queen, but because of queen a3 check, king here, knight to a4, mate threatened, bishop here, knight check, king here, checkmate. All right, so black is no fool. He's got his own plays coming for him, and now white just plays d5 and opens up both bishops. But he's down an exchange and a pawn here. Queen moves, d6. You'd like to open up the position, but basically, if you trade on c6 or e6, black won't take. They'll just castle queenside, and then you don't have time to cut them off, which is why you would want to do one of these things. So white goes for d6, bishop h7. Ooh, it looks like white gets their exchange back over here, right? That piece is trapped. And now it's equal material. In Gambits, who cares about the exchange? You still care about everything normal. You just, there's more dynamics, so there's more chance that you've got something good that you can do involving a sacrifice. G5 is a little bit odd because that turns this into a passed pawn, which seems a little bit dangerous. Oh, but I guess what white is threatening is he's planning to take on G7 once he can defend the bishop with H6. That's what he's setting up with this H pawn. So there's a direct threat here. And that's what black answers. The other move you might expect from black would be F6, but perhaps on F6 he wasn't comfortable with this, followed by bishop takes f6. I don't know. I mean, it's certainly messy. Something like this, right? I mean, if we calculate it for 10 seconds, we could resolve all these questions and figure out if they're winning or not. But my plan is just to like play through these and get a sense for what the games look like. So the king moves over. Black's trying to control this bishop with his kingside pawns. Presumably king a1 knight b4 was bad for white, so he moved his king back into the center. This is looking fine for black. I mean, he's got his knight onto a good square, and he's dealing with white's kingside pawns. Oh, but this was an annoying double threat, huh? He couldn't afford to give white this, because then the dark squares around his king become too weak. So that kind of collapses his position a little bit. And now this is the threat. Ooh la la. Yeah, now with this passed pawn and this pawn, this position's not so playable, and black resigned. All right, so there's a question about whether or not I study the openings that I'm planning on streaming on the days before them or not. In general, not, because I don't have tons of time. So I spend some time maybe like preparing the learning segments a little bit more, and also just like thinking about my plan for the next couple days. But usually I don't have like much time. So, you know, when I play an opening like the Alyekhin's defense, which is in the repertoire today, I don't know anything almost about the Alyekhin's defense. All I know is like one really good variation for white that I use to win every single game as white against the Alyekhin's defense. Other than that, I don't really know anything. Sometimes if I have time to play a little bit of blitz, like the evening before, I'll be practicing the same opening a little bit the evening before and then playing it today. But more often it's like picking out which games from the Russian Super Final I want to go over, like look at some of them in advance if I have time and pick out the best ones. But usually I would only have like half an hour to do that in the morning right before the broadcast starts. So yeah, generally not studying those. Okay, so that was cool. We're going to copy these PGNs, current. All right, so that was this game. We'll close it and grab the next one. Analysis. Copy the moves. Close it. Here. Sorry this takes a second each time. All I can show you today is how I lose to the Alyekhin because I'll be playing it as black. I can't show you how I beat it as white today. Maybe some other day it'll come up when I'm playing white. Okay? Alright, so this is the next game, again with the bishop g4 defense. Again, white grabs the bishop pair, bishop f4, e6, castles, and comes back. This looks like the same game. Oh, there were two copies of the same game in the database. Sorry. Analysis. Nothing I could do about that. I got tricked. Close it. Here. PGN. Control V. Okay. Back to the beginning. So I've got that, and I've got Kislinski versus Slugin. Kislinski, Slugin. What I'm doing today is up. I always point to the wrong direction, but it's up here is what we're doing today. And right now we're in the 11:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. segment on Diemer games. And we've only gotten through one game so far in 20 minutes, so we're going to have to speed up. Another bishop g4, and this time with the g4 and the knight e5. The rook on h1 is threatened, which is uncomfortable. You can play rook h2 to develop it, like in a Sicilian. But there's a sweet way to defend the rook. If queen h1, bishop b5, check. I thought black would maybe just go for like bishop to e4 here instead of this knight c6 move, bishop e4. But on bishop e4, there's probably just bishop c4, queen a5, rook h e1, and you're just giving white tempi. And there's starting to be some stuff on knight f7 in the air here, knight f7, bishop e6 kind of stuff, right? You can keep playing moves like this, but you're basically continuing to give white tempi, right? And then white's just upping the pressure more and more while you're nowhere near getting these rooks into the game. I mean, you don't even have your minor pieces in. So, okay, so he went for knight c6, attacking d4. White didn't care and developed. Takes, c3. Nice move. So white wants to take on b7, and then when black plays rook b8, they want to have bishop c6 check available, right? So this is not like a good variation, because what do you do next? You're low on tempo, right? You have to play something like rook d1 now, and then rook b7, rook d4, and it's not good for white at all, is it? So c3, get a tempo out of the knight, now grab b7. And this way, white has recaptured the pawn that they sacked on d4, so they're only down one pawn again now instead of two, and they've got their pieces into good squares with tempo. Still, white has to show the compensation for the one pawn still, right? So working on that still. Knight d7. So white lost the bishop pair in there just to gain some space on this side of the board. It still looks like a real struggle for white, down a pawn here. Yeah, this is the part of the game that black wants, right? This is the part where you start using your extra pawn, right? Black's expanding with his majority. And white is struggling to stay in the game. So here he's threatening bishop e5 followed by rook a to e2. So black plays e4 to keep the super strong passed pawn, and white grabs what he can. Basically, white's playing for scraps here. And you guys have seen me do that in some openings gone wrong, like one of my very last games. Just trying to hang in there. Black has a nice big advantage with this pair of passed pawns here. And white gives that up rather than bringing the black king to e5 with tempo, and tries for some counterplay on this side of the board. It did look like white had the attack, and black managed to just dodge out of it very nicely. The key thing for black, the key reason that none of this worked out for white is this check. Because this allows black to answer bishop c6 with king e7 and play here. If this bishop were on f8 in this position, then white would just play like rook d1 and roll through black. Okay? So it's like super key that white had to play c3 so that the bishop would have c6 before he takes on b7. But once he's chased the knight away, now black has the check. So this whole thing never really worked out for white, actually, starting from bishop g2. This just doesn't quite work. Which means in this position, white needs to consider some other move, be it like knight c6 or knight f3, or maybe just the whole king f2 thing was too clever. It just doesn't quite work out. And then white just struggles through this endgame. He's down a pawn, but he still has some chance. It looks bad. It looks really bad. Somehow, jeez. Somehow I think white didn't lose this, but it really looks like a loss, doesn't it? All right. Somehow white scraped that one through, but that was not something that looked fun for white. I'm going fast on purpose so we can get through more games. If you've got any questions about them, I will stop and answer. So don't worry, I'm not like completely committed to going fast, but I'm trying to get through a few. Okay, so that was Slugin. Now we got Van Hoolandt and Miladinovic. Here. Copy. Hoolandt and Miladinovic. So there. PGN. Paste it. Bring it in. All right. Now we get a G6. Oh, you mean the pawns were just too fast? Yeah. All right, so with the pawn on G6, it makes less sense to put the bishop on this diagonal, so white goes to the F7 diagonal, which also corresponds with the rook on F1. It's also with G6 less likely that black will play E6. It has weaknesses against on the dark squares if you play both, so it makes a lot of sense to switch to bishop C4. Castles, H3, presumably stopping knight, what move? Bishop G4, right? So that's a fairly defensive move to see from white in this kind of gambit. Now A3, another defensive move. I think A3 is against knight A5, but white is playing a lot of A3 and H3 type moves for a gambit. And this is a 2570 FIDE rated grandmaster playing H3 and A3 as his follow-up to the gambit. So black plays knight E8, threatening the D4 pawn. And I think that white plays D5 here. I think if he played bishop E3, black's plan is just to play E5, exploding the center. He's like, look, you just played H3 and A3. I'm feeling pretty confident now. G6 is one of the two most common moves along with bishop G4. This variation we're seeing. Okay, so white just plays D5 instead of defending it. And this is giving him space and keeping these pawns backwards, so maybe he can also play for pressure against E7. E7 and F7 would be the squares you'd want. Knight D6. And he tucks his bishop away in the hole prepared by A3. And this piece comes somewhere passive. You have to wonder why the knight doesn't come here, right? I don't see any tactics, so it's probably just that he doesn't want to give up this dark squared bishop and play into this position. But what's bad about this position for black? This looks fine for black. He's got the F5 square, and I don't know. I'm not impressed by this. I'm not sure why black plays knight e5. Doesn't play knight e5. I don't know. If somebody sees it, you can shout it at us, but I mean, it would have to be something pretty convincing. I don't see what's bad about that for black. So he retreats here. And everything on the schedule is Pacific time, which is my time. So California time. In other words, and also the first thing up there is the start of the show, right? So you can imagine that 10 a.m. has already passed, and we're somewhere in the afternoon times here. All right. So some pressure on E7, but also with the idea of switching to H4, so he can pressure both of these points and have room for the rook. Knight E5 just goes to a good square. Yeah, it's odd that he didn't play Queen H4 here, right? Oh, it's because of Knight F5. That's what the knight on D6 does, partly. It keeps the queen out of H4. So that means that black has room to play H6, and this whole queen move's not as strong as before. He just covers this because queen D2 or H4 could come at any point. He doesn't want to have to spend a defensive move then. Look how patiently white plays this whole position down a pawn, right? I mean, just from this game here, he's really emphasizing the space from the D5 pawn, and black just not having a really good pawn break. Like C6 loses a pawn, and E6, white can take and shatter black's kingside pawn structure and continue to have good play. Knight to A5. Yeah, knight A5 is not in particularly like a good thing you want to do. Many moves to go. You don't want to be off on the side here, especially since since white's dodged out of the way of it. Yeah, the white king is a bit drafty, and you see him tucking it. So they both have drafty kings. And black plays like a random move trying to get some space. This rook comes to d1, so this is just pure prophylaxis against c6 and e6, right? Look how much white's overprotecting this pawn, right? But that's the Nimzovich thing. You overprotect this pawn, and you basically are restraining all your opponent's moves by doing that. Right? We've previously seen white basically try to checkmate with this opening. And now you're seeing him just using the space a lot more in this particular game. All right, and so white is focusing on these two. It's very surprising that he's not focused more on f7, right? But he's not. I think because black is pretty strong on f5 and f6 this game in terms of like potential outposts for his pieces and their position to go there, white feels like it's easier to go after this pawn. Black's got that covered too for now. Nice. Look at this. Very, very much a positional play by white. And knight to b1 is to get c4 and get this pawn roller. So black plays b5 to stop that. That's pretty much positionally forced almost. I mean, you got to do something like that. Now c6 will really be harder to happen, and white can try and bring this knight to one of those squares. Knight d2, bishop e8. What do you think? Knight b3? Yep. Knight c5. And just simple c3 stopping b4. I was definitely expecting this. It cuts off this weakness on b2, stops b4. Just cleaning everything up. Gives you bishop b1 as well to go after g6. Now that black's played h6, this could eventually be a target. This is just very pleasant space advantage play by white. And black finally arranges c6 by getting their queen off of this horror. Queen f2, covering the knight against black's queen and also threatening this rook. If you play like knight e6 next move, right, it would win in exchange. So if black plays here, then white can play this, and then, you know, you get this position. Something like that. Just saying it's possible. I'm not saying that's exactly what would happen. I mean, in fact, you couldn't take this way probably because of this move. And bad things happen. You have to lose your queen in this line. But I guess you could play this way. And then on this move, there's also this. So I don't even know if I've got these tactics right at all. Maybe knight e6 is not the move. Maybe knight d7 is the move that white would play here. And then bishop d7, queen b6. But anyway, queen f2, he moves the loose rook. There's got to be some tactic of knight d7 or knight e6 or something. All right, and now black has successfully played c6 and traded off white's d5 pawn. So things are going to be critical now. White does not have much time now to do something. Now that black has found his way out of that. It's a matter of time before he somehow plays like f6, e5, f5, and crushes white. So queen g3 with the idea of knight takes g6, bishop back to e8 to defend it, and now he comes in with this fork. So to win an exchange, black has to take it to stop that. Now knight takes g6. If pawn takes, it's checkmate. So black has to block this diagonal. With bishop f5 or knight f5. Plays knight f5. Check. Here. All right, so white's got a rook against two knights, but he also has this tactic. And it looks like he's just winning. Right? Two rooks against two knights. Easy win. In terms of other things black could have done here, if he blocked with the bishop instead of the knight, then I think it's knight e7 is probably why he didn't do this one. Threatening here, and here, and here. And the best you can do is probably to sack your queen. And you see, I mean, black just doesn't have nearly compensation for his material. All right, so that's a cool one. PGN current. Copy. Paste it down. All right, so that was Miladinovic versus Van Hoolandt. Now we got one that actually ends with a checkmate. Okay, that sounds fun, doesn't it? E6, bishop g5. Maybe white's supposed to play bishop g5 on move 6 instead of bishop d3 like I did, because then c5 is not as good. All right, bishop e7, bishop d3, castles, queen e2. Look at this. White's making sure to castle queenside. Here, huh? Anyone see White's plan? G4, G5. Okay. So now, if White had a pawn on F2, it would be a normal position. He's basically just down a pawn. What's the compensation? I've had this kind of situation a bunch of times from like Diemer style positions, right? So it seems like Black's just traded off a bunch of your attacking potential over the last couple moves, right? With this knight d5 maneuver. This is a maneuver from the Queen's Gambit. And if White had a pawn on F2, we'd have a very like queen pawn game type of position, right? Like a Torre or a Jobava or a London system, Queen's Gambit exchange, something like that, right? So this knight d5 maneuver, like from the Queen's Gambit, trading off pieces. Now Black's equalized the center as well and super solid. What does White have? Right? He's just down a pawn in what would be a normal position if he weren't down a pawn. Well, what he has is he's got a couple tempi of time, right? While Black was doing this, White is a little bit ahead on time in terms of rook deployment, right? And bishop deployment. So, with opposite side castled positions, a few tempi can be of great, great value, and he would turn those tempi into an attack. And you see Black's willing to lose a pawn just to try and like start equalizing the tempi a little bit, right? But White is uninterested, goes for g5. If Black takes, then probably just rook g5 and rook g1. Not that knight g5 looks bad either, but in general you try not to trade, so it's not a surprise to see Black play h5. I suppose you could wonder, if you were really studying this game, it would be useful for you to figure out whether knight g5 or rook g5 is better to improve your own attacking technique. Could be worth doing. So now g6. What you never want to do is let your opponent play g6 and just like create this blockade, right? So g6, f5. So now Black's got space on the king side, and they're able to block off your bishop and defend the king side with these pieces. So they've got some hope. But what you have is you have got a pawn lodged on g6, which helps you to checkmate the king if you can get anyone else in there. Knight e5. Yeah, there's a discussion in chat about whether or not you care about the pawn. And one person says, who cares about the pawn? We're attacking. Someone else says, you do care about the pawn, but you may have enough compensation or a strong enough attack. And that's the important thing to figure out. And you're both right in a way, but I'm on the side of like, yeah, you don't really want to be down a pawn unless you're doing something that's worth that much. But that's the whole point of like, who cares, is like, who cares kind of implies that you know you're doing something important enough to sack that pawn. So knight f6, holding off, rook g5, right? White's slowly coming in here. So they found a way in for the rook. Obviously, as Black, you don't want to bring White's queen in, right? Because once this gets in, things get bad. Like here, making space for the king, and then maybe knight c6, sealing his fate. I mean, maybe there's some like ingenious defense because I'm going quickly, but I don't know. That looks like the way you normally checkmate somebody. So bishop a6. Oh, someone's saying we could play like knight f7 now. Could be a good move. Interesting. Knight f7 threatens checkmate. And on knight h5, queen h5. That does look harsh. Good call. So does white miss like this knight f7 move here? Knight f7. What does black do? It's threatening mate. This move seems good. I'm with you, Gambino. I feel like this should have been played for white. I mean, black probably tries to defend like that temporarily, and then you do this thing. But this is like exactly the kind of situation you want, right? Then you just prepare to do that and checkmate with your queen. I don't know that this is like something really defensible for black, but maybe there's some hope for them to bail out with like king e7 in time. No, it's just checkmate. Yeah, you might be smarter than a GM, or you might have just been right this particular time, right? Or you might be smarter than them, but they're better at chess. Who knows? But certainly you came up with what looks like a pretty devastating move here. So let's see. Rook h3 got played. We'll see if there's any difference. White is kind of taking it slow, but black is just really struggling to get any counterplay going. And basically this G pawn is just brutal to have that. Finally he plays knight f7, and that's it. Okay. Cool. Let's get the current one. Copy this over. All right, where's our net? So this is that game, that one. Let's go grab this. Analysis. Grabs the moves. Copy. Live chat, PGN, paste, go. We're getting a little bit faster at that, right? All right. So this we've seen Seal Laguno, and now it's Colas versus Degraeve. So this one, white is an IM and black is a GM in this next game we're about to see. It's interesting, the way I did it in Opening Explorer, I guess I didn't give a chance to see how often black plays e3. Not very often. I'm just checking in the Explorer right now. It's very rare for black to play e3. Even though, in my experience in Blitz, the move e3 is very, very common here. If I could bring one chess book on a desert island, what would it be? I don't know, something super long. Can I bring My Great Predecessors, all volumes? That would be a lot of chess to look at. That's probably what I would pick. Like, as much of My Great Predecessors as I'm allowed to carry would probably be my choice. Okay, back to our live game. So bishop g4 is played. The Grandmaster chooses the variation where he gives up the bishop pair to stay solid. And here white plays bishop e3 instead of bishop f4, just defending the pawn. Early g4, not yet deciding which way white's castling. And after bishop b4, white actually decides to castle kingside. We've seen a lot of games today where white chose to just castle queenside on purpose to mess things up. But against the bishop on b4, white respected black's ability to create weaknesses on the queen side and said, I'm not going to go risk my king on this side of the board. I will put my king behind my own pawn advances, but I'll be safer over here. And now if black takes on c3, I don't really care because it's just strengthening my center here. And giving me another c-pawn to put into the center for more central influence. What white would like to take away from black is the d5 square for his knights, but usually, I'll tell you, usually black gets the d5 square for his knights in this particular variation, in this defense. So yeah, black can also play e5 instead of taking on f3. That happens a lot to me in speed games, and here it's only been played twice in tournaments in this database here. So I don't know, what can I say? My own experience in blitz chess is that like e3 and e5 are super common in this position. Okay. All right, so we're back here. White has just castled kingside, and now he's threatening to play g5, right? Because f7 is undefended. So black should either play like h6 or castles kingside, right? He's got to defend f7 somehow, and which does he choose? He chooses h6. So he's delaying castling kingside, but he's also almost saying that he won't castle kingside, because now if he castles kingside later, white uses h6 as what's called a hook to open up the kingside. A hook is something that you can use to force something open, okay? Like, you know, if this knight were on d5, I wouldn't have a hook because I could play g5 and you could play h5. Like in the previous game we saw, white played g5 to try and open the g file, and black played h5, right? But here, this is like a hook to play g5 and force open the file. h6 is also a hook if you play like queen to d2 and then bishop takes h6. This is another way to sort of like force open an area of the board. So black chooses here to play h6 instead of castles kingside, which would be the other major choice. And I'm not sure how bad this would be either. Yeah, I don't know. It looks playable. I don't think there's a straightforward refutation for it. It might even be better than what black did, but we'll see. I mean, we've seen games like that. Bishop takes c3 and queen c7, good. Well, you do have to play h6 to stop g5. So let's see if black plays bishop takes c and queen c7 on their next move or whatever. Okay, rook a e1. So this, you see, is like I said, as far as like the Banco Gambit and sort of like general chess strategy, you're just putting your rooks on these semi-open files and waiting to see what kind of pressure you get out of it. In a position that has very few open files, having an extra open file can be on its own worth the pawn that you're down, right? Like, what's the Banco based on? It's based on the fact that you have 2 open files for your rooks, and your opponent has basically none. They have the semi-open c file, but your pawn on c5 is really strong. So essentially, the c file is useless for white. So you kind of have like 2 files of pressure for 0 for your rooks. That's like one of the major like cruxes of like the justification for the Banco Gambit, right? So here you've got 2 files for your rooks and black has 1. And that's part of the justification for this. Yeah, white could play g5 if black castled. In the variation where black castled, I mean, one option for white is g5, knight d5, queen e4, forcing a weakness, g6, and then you either play bishop d2 or knight takes d5, depending on what you're feeling. And right, or we could do it like knight d5, c d5, queen h5, g6, queen h6. You can also do it this way if you think this is better, which I don't know. I just wasn't sure exactly what approach white would take, so I didn't go too deep into it. Okay, so knight b6, a3, and now black just chooses to take it. Okay. Yeah, white's not going to want to trade queens. White's trying to control, with this choice, they're trying to control c4 so that they can move these pawns forward. Ooh, and this is a key point, being able to play this, because on knight c3, queen c2 traps the knight. And that's important, getting this in, because now white's able to force this knight. Well, I was going to say force this knight to a bad square, but I didn't realize he was going to play knight c5. So what's happening here is that white's using these pawns to try and make these 2 knights struggle to find outposts. So this is like classic bishop pair kind of strategy being used here by white. And this is what I also would say you really, really want to do if you ever get this pawn structure, is you want to try and move these c pawns forward. You don't want them stuck behind this pawn. You don't want black to play like b5, knight b6, and control the c4 square, because then the structure becomes really weak and black has 2 great outpost squares, right? So the priority is advancing these pawns. And that applies to that French defense position that we were asking about early in the game when people were saying, like, why am I so happy to leave my pawn on e4 instead of playing e5? Because I want to be able to advance these c pawns like this I talked about. And it definitely applies here. So black's struggling to find a square for his knight. And, oh, I thought white was going to play bishop f3 and kind of force this knight back. But I guess he had to stop knight g3 first. So he comes here. Now you see, like, this bishop's on a good diagonal. Black's still fighting for his knights. Struggling. cd4, cd4, queen d4. Yeah, so black is like fighting because he's trying to get space for these knights. Otherwise, they're just like long-term weak. And if he doesn't play something like c5, you know, he's just getting sent home. Bishop g2. He can't like move these pieces. And then eventually white might double on the b file as well, because white has another file there. White might play queen a4, and he can't defend this pawn with king b8, so he has to make another weakness. If you just wait around in these positions, it's really bad, so you need to fight as black to get something going. So black grabs this pawn, and now we can see basically two open diagonals, and it's going to be hard for black to defend this tactically. But this is not incorrect. A lot of you might be thinking like, oh, the knights, they're supposed to keep the position closed. If the knights don't have squares or outpost squares, they actually open the position to try and like resolve the pawn structure and find a space for the knights. Okay, if you let your opponent have two pawns next to each other like this, you are going to seriously struggle finding any squares for your knights because of how they cover everything. So against this kind of perfect pawn, against this strong pawn structure for white, you will see black players like opening the position to find space for their knights. This is totally normal chess strategy. So now we get to the tactical phase of the game. White was delaying bishop a7 while ramping up his other threats. If king takes, bishop e3. If queen e7 would be the other move. You can't play bishop c5 because this is check. So maybe white plays c5, c6, but that does let the knights in. So if he plays here, maybe white plays queen b5, hitting this knight and preparing queen a5. Actually, we could just play queen a4, right? That's maybe a major threat. So queen f4, bishop b7, king b8, bishop g2, and black just resigned. The queen is nicely covering a lot of the like knight h3, queen g3 counterplay, and now white's just threatening bishop moves anywhere, winning the queen or also setting up checkmates. So black gave up. So that is a super nice one, right, as well. Interesting how white prosecuted that. That bishop pair and that central space. So that gives us an example of what it looks like when black castles on the queen side instead of the king side, right? Cool to see. You guys want to see one or two more? We've got a 12-move draw. I don't know how exciting that's going to be. Close that. Close that. We are making it through a good number of games, right? It's been 50 minutes, and we've gone through like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games. So we're getting through one every 10 minutes. So we're getting a good sampling of some things that can happen. Let's just click through this real quick without the H file because it's too short to really be super interesting. So here white didn't go for H3, right? That's one little surprise. He simply castles first. Now develops some space. Interesting when black chose to play C6. And they just agreed to a draw with nothing having happened yet, huh? There has not been a black win yet going from highest rated down, but we may get to one at some point. Okay, so that was a strange, interesting, that white just did nothing special and black just agrees to a draw here without white having achieved anything, just off of this space that white has. Or the fact that neither of them actually wanted to play chess. I'm looking down this list, I see 1-0, 1-0, 1-1/2, 1-0. So I don't see a win for black anywhere soon. Here's the first one we see. So let's open that in a new tab. And then I'm going to remember that I'm here. Open a new tab. Open a new tab. Open a new tab. Open a new tab. All right, we'll see how many of these we get through, but that gives us a few more. All right. So here, copy, live chess. I already copied this one, right? All right, so now we've got a win for black. Finally, bishop g4 variation, and white goes for the bishop pair. So he doesn't rush to take the bishop on c6. He first throws in queen f3 to try and gain a tempo on this weakness on b7. The other disadvantage to bringing out the bishop, obviously, is that b7 is undefended. White can use that to gain one tempo on their development at some point with bishop g2 or queen f3. If knight e5, then d e5, this knight can't go anywhere good, and you drop this, right? You can try this, but it doesn't work out for more than one reason. Like here, there's this. And now on bishop d7, the king has to come out, and you know, white can also just play a move like bishop g5, trying to play rook d1. And it's unlikely that black untangles this diagonal without losing something. This looks pretty good too, right? Just going for that. Anyway, c6. So white gets one development tempo there. And now goes for h4, h5. This is a tricky variation. That bishop was trapped, but black saves the a4 square for it with this. If white takes back, the bishop can now get out here. Whoa. Some interesting use of this rook, right? First it traps a bishop, and then it unstoppably attacks f7. Black is struggling against these early tactics from white. And now white just wants to castle queenside and sack the e5 pawn rather than, you know, trading it and letting this bishop out, right? It's just like, sure, have my e5 pawn too. What do I care about any of this stuff? And now black's like a move away from having everything set up. He almost got everything out in time. So here, what's white threatening? White's threatening rook c6, pawn c6, bishop a6. That's why you can't just play, you know, a normal developing move. Okay. So on rook c2, he still has to fight against this rook c6 threat, and he doesn't really have control of like c7 and stuff to do it. Maybe queen d6 is another candidate move. I'm not sure, but maybe that really slows down him getting anything else out. I don't know. Black's up 3 pawns here. It's a lot for white to hammer through, but with bishop b4, he goes into this tactic. And now black has a knight, rook, and 3 pawns against the queen. And it's a tricky position to assess or play. That seems to help black. It just solidifies the structure. This looks now very simple for black to me. Very simple to play. I would be feeling good about what black has here. Just, you know, c2 and stuff. And yeah, white just resigned. So that was a win for black. That was interesting. I feel like white made black's task a lot easier with this bishop takes d5 move. Because black's only like weakness that I'm seeing here is maybe like the e6 square. And I just don't understand why he rushes to trade his bishop for this knight. I mean, I understand the knight's on a good square and you're going to have to work around it. You can't really undermine it, but that seems like a losing move, unless white's just completely losing the whole time. All right. PGN, current. Grab all this. So that was this one. Yeah, okay. So that brings us to this. Grab the moves. All right, so again against e6, we're seeing the quick bishop g5 instead of the bishop d3 that I'd been playing. a3 to deal with knight b4. Now you wonder about bishop d4 for black, right? Okay, he does it. White gives that. Castle. So now white's down 2 pawns. I don't know about... Well... So I guess white's going to play something like queen g4 or queen h5 next. And if black just castles, what's going on? I wonder how violent white could get. Let's try it just to find out, okay? The goal is just to learn a little bit about what these Diemers usually look like. So if king h7, then knight f6 or g5 wins the game. I mean, for one thing, it gives us queen d4. So I'm just going to play here for him, and now queen h5. So I'm just trying to play queen takes h6. And if black wants to prevent that, he could play king g7 or knight f5. Knight f5, rook takes, pawn takes, check. Here, knight g5, knight f6. We're down a rook, which is exciting. On bishop c4, there's queen d4, here, 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 and I think black defends this just fine. So the other option would be to try and bring this rook over. I don't think this will quite work for white, but it's pretty close. It's interesting. The idea is to bring the rook to g3. It's just taking a while. Or we could go through f4 to h4 maybe and threaten this. Black's a little bit frozen. Maybe they can do this with the rook. Alternatively, white can now play a move like queen h5, kind of just threatening bishop takes h6. But again, on knight f5, what's white doing? Maybe g4 is their chance here. And then an important defensive pattern I've seen before is this move, preventing this piece from getting chased away. Which, I mean, black might not even need here because of knight e3. But this queen h4 move often just ends the aggression. And I think it does here nicely. Good way to fight this move, g4. Queen h5, knight f5. I'm not personally impressed with white's compensation right here. I mean, it's basically just tactical to me at this point, like whether or not we have a direct attack. Because we're down, we've given up our center pawn, so I need to like do something. Otherwise, long term, I'm not convinced of this position. And is rook takes knight not good for white? I don't think so. And this bishop's defending this, so you can't take it. I'm not sure what the follow-up is. So if black just castled here, I'm not sure what white was going for. Maybe c4 is a good move, though, actually, which I haven't considered yet. The point is, if black goes to f6, you can just take and take on h6. With queen g4 coming. So, so they got to try maybe here if they want to go to the king side. But now you've got f6 for your knight. So now maybe I can do this. And if this, then this ought to be something good. Even this isn't clear because there's this move. So even here it might not be decided yet, right? Because once black puts a knight on f5, it's such a good defensive piece. Not at all clear. Okay, so let's look at the game where black plays knight f6. White trades. Brings out the queen hitting g7 square. Knight e5. Winning some stuff. Oh, black hangs on. Oh, this is just grisly. Isn't it time for like rook d1 here? I mean, for queen d1 here? Isn't that how black won that other game we saw? This move. Stopping the king from moving to unpin the knight. And then next move you have queen d4. I guess there's a6 staying in the game. So I come around here threatening this, and then knight takes queen. Sorry. Didn't mean to show you a tired variation. My apologies. And if we just take, how good or bad is this? I guess it's winning for white, so that's good enough. Just play the queen versus rook and bishop endgame. This is also going to fall. But anyway, after the queen moves, this is just a massacre. Oh, it's similar to what we did in the game. And wins. All right. Very similar to that variation we just looked at with queen d1. So, yeah. I would go so far as to say as this looks like just like a clear mistake, because now it's just there's not going to be a fast way to castle and this is going to come in. Whereas I feel like this castle's kingside was like super unclear. I mean, maybe I was missing some obvious way that white should play this kind of position. But I certainly didn't see it. You know, if queen g4, what I didn't like was f5 here. You know, whichever way you take, black has like knight back to f5 now. This doesn't feel right. But maybe it is all right. I really don't know what's going on. Maybe something like this is surprisingly a playable line, but yeah, I don't know. I'm a little bit at a loss for this. For what white can really achieve in this variation. It does not seem good enough to me. All right. Anyway, let's grab another game. It's very interesting how white chose to sack this pawn on d4. I mean, certainly they could have played it some other ways as well. All right, so that's this game. Close it. This game, same one. Close it. Next game. Analyze it. Grab the PGN. Copy. All right, it's another bishop g4. And again, the threat on f7 to get black to castle queenside before they can organize everything and castle queenside instead, maybe. And black goes for a quick e5 break rather than trying to maneuver on the queenside here. And white just gives up the center and goes for broke. I'm going to assume that if pawn takes, that white wins with queen f5. No, I can't even assume it. This is all like a big mess. It might even be bishop h7 because, you know, black can play d3 if you go queen f5. Right? That's far from obvious. So actually it might be that you have to do this, 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 and now here, here, check, here, check, here, bishop h6, and now if king here, you have queen g4, and if king somewhere like this, you win the queen, and if king here, you win the queen. Although you've given up so much, I don't know if you even win this, right? We've just sacked so much. I mean, there's also the move bishop h6 here. But that would also be associated with them playing queen f6, and basically you win their queen on this square. And you can also play just bishop takes b4 here, and then rook e8 check, king here, and just play this position. Somebody wants to play g6 here. Oh, not letting the black pieces out. That's insane. So you're threatening checkmate. The only move that stops it seems to be taking, but taking also gets checkmated. Just like this. And you're threatening here and here. Thanks, Wormius. I think you might be right. I think g6, not opening the g file right away, but you can always open it later if you want to, and you don't give black this f6 square. So you really, like, okay, so this kind of sacrifice, knight f6, it's like a famous kind of sacrifice, right? And the idea is you block the f6 square. And so to follow it with g6 on purpose, leaving that square blocked, is actually super classic. It didn't occur to me at the moment. I was just looking direct, capture, 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 threat to mate, threat to mate, threat to mate. But this one does it. Which also occurs to me that on bishop h7, maybe black just plays king here, right? Not taking the bishop. But then I think our move is still, might still be queen h5. What is our move then? Actually, it's not clear then what we do. Maybe just castle queenside. And just keep going here, because this looks pretty good for white. By castling queenside, I'm introducing the possibility of taking this knight in a lot of variations. Meanwhile, it's not clear what black wants to do here. I don't know. Super messy. So anyway, black took with the knight, not the g-pawn. So now they can always defend this checkmate with g6 if they need to, and the g-file's not totally open. Check here. What the heck? And cleans up. So now black's the one sacking a piece, basically, right? They're facing these threats, and they just clean up the whole king side, and black's up 3 pawns. Right, so you take the knight here, and now look at that. Black's completely defended their king side for the moment, and kept the white king from castling, but they had to sack a piece themselves to do it. Yeah, it's awkward for white if the black queen gets into b2. So white has to choose between like bishop a3, which may sideline the bishop, or this like weird queen a3 move with the idea of bishop c5, getting his bishop back into the game. He gets it to an endgame. Black gets a fourth pawn. A fourth pawn for the piece, but the bishop pair is so good. Well, the bishop pair is gone. Man, this is messy. Ooh, the back rank mate. Now, this endgame here, some of you may remember I lost as white yesterday with a passed like c-pawn on c6 or something. But in theory, if you've got time on your clock, this is a big advantage for white. And this was a tournament game between masters, so white comfortably wins it, despite the difficulties. Very nice. All right, guys, we're going to have to take a 5-minute break. 5-minute break, sorry. And then we will be on to our final segment of Blitz. Okay? I hope you enjoyed playing through all these Blackmar Diemer games and have a sense of like some of the different plans. If black castle's kingside, if black castle's queenside, if white castle's kingside, if white castle's queenside, if black goes bishop g4 and trades off the bishop pair right away, or if black plays e6 and c5, or if black plays g6, bishop g7. We saw a cool game where white just put his pawn on d5 and like pressured black with space for a long time positionally. So we saw like a variety of different games. And interestingly, even though we were looking through like 10 to 15 games of players rated 24 to 2500 FIDE, in only one game did black actually win against white. That was interesting, huh? Not what you expected, I bet. All right, so